Father, we bless you. We thank you. We need you in this time. My heart as a pastor is burdened for all of the things that our church is struggling with. I don't know all of them. You do. You know all of the little corners and thorns and spirits of fear by whatever names they go by in our life. And I'm asking, Father, that you would be so kind, so gentle, so comforting, that you would come and enter into all of those areas. Again to the mountain by himself alone. And so again, we don't know exactly what mountain or where, but we can surmise some of the details based on Luke 8 and others. This is probably north of the Sea of Galilee. Again, it's like a clock. This is probably 12:30, somewhere up there. There's mountains. The Golan Heights are over here, somewhere around Bethsaida, up here on a mountain. He goes up by himself and he sends the disciples away. Perhaps he could see, it's in the spring because the Passover was near, not a lot of rain in the spring, but perhaps he could see down with the reflection of the moon on the lake and perceive all that we're about to see. Verse 16. Now when evening came, his disciples went down to the sea, and after getting into a boat, they started to cross the sea to Capernaum. It had already become dark, and Jesus had not yet come to them. The sea began to be stirred up because of a strong wind was blowing. Then, when they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking on the sea and drawing near to the boat, and they were frightened. But he said to them, "It is I, do not be afraid." So they were willing to receive him into the boat, and immediately the boat was at the land to which they were going. Again, a brief version of the same exact occurrence that we see in Matthew 14. Matthew 14 adds only a little micro story within the larger story in between this. So as they see him coming in Matthew 14, they're all freaking out. They think it's in Greek a phantasm, a ghost. We don't know what it looked like, what he looked like walking on the water, but I've never seen anybody do that. I don't know about you. And so they were very frightened, and he says in Matthew the same, it says, don't be afraid, it's me. And Peter says, for some reason, I love him. Peter says, for some reason, if it's really you, call me out too. And he says, come on, And Peter gets out of the boat. And the only other human on record, besides Jesus, that actually walked on water, Peter, right? We give him a bad rap because at the end, he begins to look at the wind more than at Jesus, and he begins to sink, and Jesus rescues him and then brings him into the boat, and then the storm is calmed there and there at the land. But I've always thought, man, if I were Peter, I would have reminded my friends of that for the rest of my life. Not that I sunk, but that I actually walked. I would have done it as often as possible. We were around the campfire long after Jesus has ascended. Hey, anybody raise their hand? Were you guys at the feeding of the 5,000? Yeah, I know all of you were there. After that, anybody walk on water? Anybody? I did. Yeah, that's right, I did. I would have rubbed it in their face. We give him a bad rap because he sinks, but John doesn't mention that. He simplifies it, and he does that on purpose. There are 4 things here that I see in this story that I want to walk through and apply to us, and the exact 4 things that Jesus solves when he comes. And the 4 things are this. It's on the sea. We're going to talk about that. It's at night. Jesus is not with them, and there's a contrary wind, a storm, okay? They're on the Sea of Galilee. Yes, it's a lake, but they called it a sea. Doesn't matter. They're on the water. It's at night. Jesus is not with them, and there's a contrary wind or a storm. Now let's work on this for a second, because in the scriptures, from Old to New Testament, beginning to end, the sea is an important image. It stands for something, and it is used to describe and illustrate something, and that something isn't good. It's actually chaos and disorder. The sea represents chaos and disorder. It's in Genesis 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, right? And now the earth was formless and void, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. The waters represented disorder and chaos, formless and void. All through the Psalms, when David or the other psalmists mention the sea, it's almost always, very few exceptions, because this is an ancient Near Eastern picture, almost always representative of chaos and disorder. The voice of God speaks over the seas. The voice of God speaks over the flood, which is an extension of that chaos, kind of returning back to Genesis 1 when we're much, much later. Even in the end, all the way to the end, we have the unholy Trinity in Revelation 13. We have Father, Son, and Spirit, and because the devil, the accuser of the brethren, the deceiver, is not an inventor, he's not a creator, he's a manipulator, right? He takes what he can and he twists it and corrupts it. He can't create things like God does, so he takes what he can and then he messes with it. He changes the code and he twists it. He paints it a different color and he puts horns and thorns on it. And so the Trinity, Father, Son, and Spirit, is what we see in Revelation 13 if we look really close. We have Satan the dragon, then we have a beast from the land, the false prophet, and we have a beast from the sea, the Antichrist, the beast that comes out of chaos, out of disorder. The sea and waters from the beginning to the end in ancient Near Eastern culture, they had not mastered the sea in boats yet. It was a place of fear and difficulty and chaos. And this is where the disciples are. They're on the sea. They're on the waters. And this is meant to stir something up. Remember now Exodus chapter 12, the Passover. Exodus chapter 13, the plunder of Egypt. Chapter 14, they're going out and they're pinched by the army. Chapter 15, the army is behind them, the army of the greatest and strongest nation in the world at the time, with their chariots raging down on mothers carrying babies and dads pulling carts. And the pillar of cloud goes from in front of them to behind them to give them a little moment. And the waters of chaos are parted, right? The Red Sea. He says, Moses, you need to do nothing but stand and watch and see the salvation of the Lord. So raise your hands, and he raised it, and a wind came. You notice the relevance to the story? A wind came and blew, and the waters of the Red Sea stood like a wall to the right and a wall to the left, and it wasn't just muddy. This is like a second miracle. I think they walked across on dry ground, not muddy ground. And the waters of the sea the chaos parted, and then chaos enveloped the Egyptians. The first thing is the disciples are on the sea. The second is important because it's at night. And again, I may relate to that a little bit more than you do, but darkness is also not a good thing. Darkness is where Jesus enters in the gospel. He says, I enter into the darkness and I bring light. So darkness is this idea of I can't see, I can't think, I can't understand. There's no revelation. We have the sea, we have darkness. And then it's very clear, Jesus is up on a mountain and he sends his disciples away and they are without him. That's always dangerous. And then to make matters worse, of course, there's some sort of storm. It doesn't seem to be like a cloudy storm, but a contrary wind. And so it's whipping up waves. It seems to be coming from the west, because if we're correct, they're headed to the west from the east. And so the wind is coming from the west, from the Mediterranean Sea, and it's preventing them from going anywhere. The sea, chaos, night and darkness. Jesus is not with them. And a storm, a wind is upon them. I wonder if you can relate to any of those. Perhaps all of those. I wonder if there is some chaos and disorder in your life. You feel like perhaps you didn't know it, but you found yourself in the sea with the disciples. This is a very famous picture from Rembrandt. It's not the picture of the story we're in now because Jesus is in the boat. This is the picture of the other story, which also happened in history, in reality, where Jesus is likely sleeping in the boat. This would be Matthew chapter 8. And they're out on the same sea, caught in a storm, but Jesus is peacefully sleeping. That's always the first miracle for me. I have no idea how that happened. And they wake him with this cry. Don't you care that we're dying? Very, very dramatic, but I would have sang the same tune. Don't you care that we're perishing? And Jesus gets up and just kind of to the sea, and everything goes, and they all look at him, and he says, why don't you trust me? Why don't you have faith? And then they all look at each other and like, who is this guy? That's this story. And Rembrandt, there's a much more beautiful story about this. Rembrandt often, he does it at the cross. He does it in a lot of other paintings. He's one of the disciples, and he's breaking the fourth wall, and he's looking at you as you look at the painting. It's very, very interesting. We'll save that story for another time. But I wonder if the boat maybe looked like this. I don't know. This next picture is from an Asian artist that I'm not familiar with, Yim Mao Kun. It's an oil painting, which I love. There's something rustic about it. I love it. I wonder what it looked like. This is very much Galilee from having been there. And the disciples are seeing this person walk on the water. This next one is perhaps my favorite. I don't know how to say her name. Amédée Verent. It's dark, but you can count 12 men in the boat. And they're all freaking out. The waves are there, and this person is coming. They're on the sea of chaos. It's at night. Jesus is not with them, and there's a contrary wind. Just to stimulate your imagination, I wonder if you feel any chaos. I wonder if you're in a place of darkness, perhaps. Sometimes we go through, and believers for centuries, before Jesus and after, have gone through serious periods of dark nights of the soul, periods of dryness, periods where they feel like they're a bit in the wilderness, in the desert, and God's voice is a little bit more silent. God seems to be a little bit more distant. I wonder if you've felt that. Maybe you're feeling it now. You're familiar with that. Jesus isn't with them. God says a promise. We'll talk about the Manna Principle a little bit, but there's a promise that he gives to his people. I will never leave you or forsake you. That's a promise, and God makes promises and never breaks them. And so we hold on to that, but let me ask you, have you ever felt lonely? Ever? Well, of course you have. God says he'll never leave you. He's always with us. His presence is always with us, but we also feel lonely, and so we struggle with some of the promises. It's on the sea of chaos. It's at night. Jesus isn't with us. And perhaps maybe right now there's a particular storm that you're in. Joblessness, health issues, relational issues, infertility, all kinds of things that we know, and Liza and I and our family have been vigilantly praying for in our church family, specific storms. I wonder if that is your story today. If so, I'd like to talk to you about fear. You see it in the text? When they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking on the sea and drawing near to the boat, and they were frightened. Matthew 14 and Mark uses the word terror. They were terrified. Probably because of the circumstances, but probably also because they saw Jesus coming and they didn't know what to make of that. Fear is very complex and it's very personal. I'm not going to try to simplify it because I don't think it can be. It's really, really simple to say things like this, okay? I'm going to step out of my box over here and say, you know what the most repeated promise is in all of the scriptures? The most repeated promise, some of them count even 365 of them, perfect for every single day of the year. I'm not making fun or making cliche, I'm just saying, the most repeated promise is fear not. Fear not. And so here's my application for you, fearful people. Stop it. Stop it. Okay? Let's pray and go home. And sometimes that's how it feels. That's how it feels to me. I read some of these things and I'm like, I get it. I'm struggling. My little switch is red and it's supposed to be green. Okay? And if I can just flip it to green, then we're good. But I can't flip it to green. Or when I flip it to green, it doesn't last very long and it flips back to red. And so just the idea that God says fear not so much is good, But it's not like a silver bullet magic pill against fear. I don't know if it is for you, but it's not for me. What's more helpful perhaps is this, that you take all of those commands and you put them together and you realize this: God's most merciful, tender, comforting words that he ever speaks in the scriptures are spoken to the fearful. Now that might help me a little bit. I don't know if it helps you. God's tenderest, most comforting words are spoken to those struggling with fear. Don't fear. You have nothing to fear. This is important for you to understand. I am here. So we begin to settle into some of these things about fear, and we know some of these things. If you're familiar with your scriptures, then you know that fear wasn't always. Fear has a birthday, it has a beginning, and it will have an end, fortunately. Hallelujah, thank you, Jesus, come quickly, okay? Fear did have a birthday, and it's a specific moment, and we even see it. Genesis 1, we have all the creation of all things, and God says it's very good. The only thing that's not good is that man is without woman, and so he creates woman. And then at the end of chapter 2, they were both naked and not ashamed. We're reading in, there was no fear. They walked with God in the cool of the evening. This was some really brilliant sort of relationship, and they had it all. And then the serpent comes in. Revelation 12 on the other side calls him Satan, the dragon, the serpent of old. So we know who that is. Takes the words of God, takes the form of something good, twists them and tempts everything. They eat the fruit, gives it to her husband who is with her, and immediately what do they feel? Immediately, the first result is shame over their nakedness, hiding, and fear. When God comes down to walk with them, he asks a question. You've heard me talk about it so many times. God never asks a question he doesn't know the answer to. He's inviting confession from Adam. Where are you, Adam? Adam raises his hand. I'm over here. I was hiding from you. I heard the sound of you coming and I was afraid. Fear's birthday. There was no fear. Fear of death, fear of punishment, fear of these things before this moment. So fear had a beginning. And if we go to the end of the book, Revelation 21 and 22, this was a fun study that I did this week. In the new heavens and the new earth, I recorded at least 16 things that there are none of in the new heavens. 16 things that are not found in the new heavens and the new earth. It seems to be a theme. No tears, no death, no mourning, no crying, no pain. I like all that, all right? There's also no cost of the water that gives life. There are no sinners there that are not covered by the blood of Jesus. There's no temple. There's no need of sun or moon. There's no night. There's no closed gates in the city at night. There's nothing unclean in the city. There's no one who practices abomination or lying. There's no curse, no night, no need of lamp or sun. There are two things mentioned twice. No night and no need of anything because Jesus, the Lamb, is the light. So fear has a birthday, but fear has a death day too. And we are living in between those two. And it's complex. It's complex. Some of us struggle with fear because of a story, because of a pile of stories. Some of us feel fear working itself in our bodies in panic, in anxiety. We have physical things that happen to us when we get afraid. We can live in this moment that the disciples are. We tend to live, perhaps, hopefully, and Lord Jesus, help us, not all of our life, but long periods, perhaps, sometimes, unfortunately, on the sea at night. Jesus doesn't feel near, and I'm in a storm. And I've been here for 10 years. I've been here for 25. I've been here for 6 months. Some of us feel like that's a lot of our story. Fear is kind of everywhere. It's inevitable in this life, unfortunately. And so working our way through it is something that's really, really, really important to this life of discipleship. And so I went through all of the stuff that I've thought and written and even preached on fear in the past, working on even the idea of a book on fear, and I wrote probably 30,000 words on it already, and I hate them all. And so I'm probably going to start over at some point. But just because it's so personal, it's a part of my story, right? I can tell you this. I'll be 50 in a couple of months or few months, and right now I feel less hindered by fear than I ever have in my whole life. And that's because I've tried very, very hard and tried to remember a couple of these things. I've tried to remember my identity. I've tried to remember the presence of God. I've tried to remember to take thoughts captive and do all the things that Jesus and David and Paul tell us. But I got two things for you, and they're brand new because I'm just boiling it all down. I was praying this morning, God, help me make this super simple. Here's the first thing. The first thing is, from this story, I want you to think with me about just simply this one thing. Recognizing and locating fear in our life. Here's the first big step. We can generally feel afraid of certain things. Sometimes we know what it is. It's a party, or it's a public gathering, or it's public speaking, or it's death, or it's heights, or it's snakes, or it's the color purple, or whatever it is, right? I know you have these certain phobias. I have generalized fear. I have anxiety, free-floating fear, all these things. Sometimes we know what they're attached to. Often we don't. It's just this fog. And the first big thing is a prayer and an offering to God. God, would you help me recognize and locate when fear is active in my life? That was the first big thing. And for me, it was fear of man, fear of rejection, fear of abandonment. These kinds of things were top of the list for me. So that when I got into a difficult situation, the thing that I had to do was pause for just a second, orient myself to the presence of God, ask him to make his presence known to me, and then say, where might fear be attacking me right now? Where might I be making decisions based on fear? Where might I be dancing to the tune that fear is playing in my heart? Because that's the most important thing right now. Because that space I want to back up from. But to recognize and locate fear is the first big prayer. And that takes a lot of self-knowledge. It takes a lot of humility. It takes a lot of discipline to do. The second thing is this. Very, very simple. But I think it's profound because it's helped me so much. When you recognize and locate the fear, 1, 2, you invite Jesus into that place. You invite Jesus into that place. Because here's what I'm convinced he wants to do. Because he does it with the disciples, I'm going to show you. He wants to not only rescue you from fear, he wants to redeem fear itself. And I'll show you how. He wants to redeem fear itself in your life and turn this tool of the enemy, this weapon of the devil, against the devil and for your good. Now, we don't have a word for that in English. It's not something that we would say is fragile or sturdy. Fragile like a wine glass or an artifact from grandmother that's precious and we got to take care of. It's not something that's sturdy like a tree stump or a shovel. This idea really came to me in a new way from this guy named Nassim Nicholas Taleb. He writes a book called Anti-Fragile, and that's the idea. Anti-fragile. Here's his thesis. There are some things that get stronger when we test them. Some things get stronger when we test them, and only when we test them. A big illustration would be your immune system. Your immune system protects you from viruses and bacteria and sicknesses of all kinds only because it is slowly tested throughout your life. As you test your immune system, it gets stronger. It tests and it gets stronger, and then it's able to protect you from more. At least that's what it's supposed to do. When it begins to attack itself, that's called autoimmune disease. And that's not the way that the body is supposed to work. So things like that are interesting. I wonder if God isn't conspiring for us and against the devil, trying to redeem the fears in our life to say, hey, listen, I've got this idea. This is the Father speaking to you. I'm going to take every one of your fears, small or large, phobia, anxiety, worry, whatever it is. I'm going to take every one of those, and by my grace, I'm going to turn it into an invitation for me to draw nearer to you. So here's my big idea, and we're going to work it out. By God's grace, every fear is an invitation to intimacy. When we begin to see it that way, I think things can begin to change. God, I am really scared of walking into this party right now because there's going to be so many people I don't know. Would you be with me? And then he says, yes, I'm going to be with you, and I'm going to be so near to you, and I've got some surprises for you in this party, and they're going to be really good. Do you trust me? Yes, I trust you. Let's go. Father, I'm going into this job interview, and I cannot sustain another rejection. I need a job. You know this. I cannot go with another no. I can't do it. It terrifies me. He says, I'm right here with you. I will never leave you or reject you or forsake you. I'm going to be with you now. We're going to go do this together. And I'm going to draw nearer to you because of that. Will you go with me? Yeah, I'll go with you. Okay, let's go. And we walk in. In this kind of way, every fear can become an invitation into intimacy. An invitation into intimacy. Now let's look back at our story, because all these four things Jesus solves. Remember, the disciples are on the sea. It's at night. Jesus is not with them, and there's a storm. Look back at this text. Verse 18, the sea began to be stirred up because a strong wind was blowing. And then when they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, it's about 6 miles wide, so they're right about in the middle of the north part of the sea, and drawing near to about 3 or 4 miles, when they saw Jesus walking on the sea. So the first thing is he walks on top of the disorder and the chaos. He walks on top of the disorder and the chaos. Everything else you throw on a sea, the sea will envelop it. The disorder and the chaos will swallow it. Unless it's shaped like a boat or it's buoyant in some way, you throw a rock, you throw a human, you throw a big cube of whatever in it, the sea is generally going to absorb that, envelop it. But Jesus doesn't. Jesus comes and walks on top of chaos and disorder in a way that says, I am above it. I am sovereign over it. And that's the point. Remember, in John, he's describing and illustrating Jesus as the greater Moses. God, the Father, through Moses, parted the Red Sea. I do not think it's an exaggeration to say God himself, the greater Moses, walked on top of it. He walked on top of it. So he comes walking to them on the sea and drawing near to the boat, and they were frightened because he said, but he said to them, it is I, do not be afraid. I think this is where he solves the second two, the darkness, the not being able to know and see, and him not being with them. He obviously comes to them and he reveals. Revelation is the answer to darkness in the Gospel of John. Revelation is light. He says, I am with you, don't be afraid. And then he comes to them. It's one thing to be in darkness like I was when I was a kid and turn on the light. It's another thing to be in darkness and to have the revelation of God's presence with you. I would say that's better than a lamp. That's more deep and personal than turning on a lamp and making the darkness go away. He solves both of those problems by coming to them, bringing revelation of who he is and his presence. And finally, Matthew 14 and Mark say that the storm was stilled. Here we get an end of the journey. So they were willing to receive him into the boat, and immediately the boat was at the land to which they were going. You see, the wind wasn't a factor anymore. He locates them in the middle of the lake, 3 or 4 miles against the wind. If they were near the shore, it wouldn't be so terrifying. They're in the middle of the north side of the lake. Jesus comes into the boat and boom, they're there where they're supposed to go. It's almost like a second miracle. In Matthew, again, he calms the storm and they're there. Here, John simplifies it and says, we were where we're supposed to be. Jesus comes in and solves all those 4 things. Do you see this? Do you see it in the text? As I read this over and over again, I'm like, okay, I think you want to say something to us about fear. I wonder if that is relevant to you today. Not a list of 7 things or 17 things or 70 things or a bunch of cliches about this, but just to say, listen, fear is complex. It's personal. Sometimes you know the story of its birthday in your life, not just in existence in the universe in Genesis 3, but in your life. You know, this happened to me. I went through this experience, and since then, I've been different. But in order to, sometimes the fog of fear, in order to recognize and locate what the fear is, with God's help, by his Spirit, by his word, by his people, and then to say, would you come with me into that fear? And I know that can sound a little cliche. Ask God to be with you when he already is, but there's a difference. There's a big, big difference between recognizing that, yeah, I can never go, Psalm 139, I can never go somewhere that's out of your presence, to the bottom of the sea, to the other side of the moon, to the other side of the dawn. You're always there. I get that. But to be actively participating in God's presence is a totally different thing. Psalm 139 says there's nowhere you can go where God isn't. But are you welcome? Are you inviting God? Are you aware of it? Are you active in it? That's a totally different thing. That's a totally different thing. And so this idea is, I think, it's been profound. It's been profound for me. Let me end this way. I told you about the Manna Principle. This is an idea that really kind of helps me, I think. You remember manna in the Old Testament. He gives it to them, I think in chapter 16, Exodus chapter 16, on the other side of the Red Sea. They're hungry. They're starting to grumble. We had meat in a pot back in Egypt, right? I know we were slaves, but still we were full slaves. We weren't hangry, free people. We'd rather be full slaves than hangry free people. And Moses is like, oh, God, here we go. Okay. And so God gives them this manna that rains down, says like coriander seed on the ground. They go and collect it, and they can make a bread thing out of it. But here's the thing. The fear, I don't know about you, but the fear of an empty cupboard each night is kind of a big deal. I don't know about you, but I like to go to sleep at night knowing that I have enough in my bank account, that I have enough in my savings account, and that I have enough dried beans in the cupboard, right? Just in case something happens. Enough toilet paper. 2020 taught me that, all right? I want to have enough just in case. Now think about it. 40 years of the Israelites in the wilderness. They collect enough bread for that day. Every night they go to sleep, their cupboard is bare. Every night, except for Saturday night, when they get double because of the Sabbath, or Friday night rather, so to cover the Sabbath. That's the only time. Every night they go to sleep, their cupboard's bare. What is to speak to their fear? What silences the fear of an empty cupboard? Only the promise of God. Only the promise that tomorrow I will never not have manna on the ground. This is a very important training period for a whole nation of people who come out of slavery. And we can learn something by it too. The Manna Principle. I I solve my fears by having extra. No, God says, man, I want to solve your fears with my promise. Do you see how that changes things? When we hold on to a person, the person of God and his promises, rather than the stockpiles of extra. Jesus called that guy in his parable a fool, who said, I have enough for many lifetimes. I'm going to store it up in, tear down my bins and build bigger ones to store all my grain. I have food for a lifetime. And Jesus says, you fool, you fool. Tonight your life is required of you. You're fool, okay? The Manna Principle is important. It makes me think of this. The first time you saw a tense movie or a scary movie, maybe you have a favorite. Can you imagine that time? First time you saw something really tense on the screen. Maybe you're in the theater, maybe you're at home, whatever. Your first time you're jump scares and all this stuff. Compare that to the 56th time you saw the same movie. Imagine you see this movie 56 times. You quote it, you know. The jump scares, they don't scare you anymore, do they? Because you know they're coming. And you're actually entertained by it. You're actually like, ooh, look, this is going to look like it's the end, but it's not the end because the hero comes to save the day, right? There's a difference. There's a difference. I wonder if God, by turning fears upside down, coming in and solving all these things like he does with the disciples and saying every fear can be an invitation to intimacy, if we were to turn that in our life and go, this looks dark. I wonder how God's going to solve this one. This feels empty. I wonder how God's going to fill it because that's what he always does. I feel terrified right now. I wonder how this will lead me to a greater intimacy. That can change everything for us. I think that's what Jesus was teaching his disciples. Recall, he's on the mountain. He sends them away. There's nothing that Jesus doesn't know. He sends them away by himself. It's almost as if he sets it up. It's at night. They're on a sea. He tells them to go to the sea. He's not with them, and he probably knows the wind is coming. That's why he comes to them. He sets it up like a father would, like a good father would. Not to create a tense teaching moment just for the sake of teaching, but to allow something to go and then to step in and go, hey, can I help you? I don't know if you've had a good father in your life, or maybe you've had good father figures. But I've had a good father in my life who has stepped in at times and said, you know, I might have some things to share with you. I might have some things to show you. Can I help you? And you know what that does is it increases the intimacy with my father. I wonder if God could do that in moments of fear. He seems to do it. Jesus is quick here at the end. The Mount of Transfiguration, he's up with 3 of his disciples. The other 9 are down at the bottom. And they're working with the crowd. And they're trying to exorcise a demon. But they can't do it. And so Jesus, after probably a couple days, comes down with James and John and Peter. And he come and the crowd is like going crazy. Hey, we brought all these sick and you were up there and we couldn't go. And there's this demon possessed and we brought them to your disciples, but they couldn't do it. And Jesus is like, well, okay, let me show you how, disciples. This one only comes out through prayer, and I'll show you. You think that increased their intimacy? Of course it did. Think about the parable of the soils. Soil that's sowing seed. The seed that is sown on the path, and the birds come and trip it away. The seed that's sown on rocky places has no soil. The seed that's sown in the thorns. The thorns of what? Do you remember? The thorns of the worries of the world and the wickedness of wealth, and then good soil. Are you a third soil kind of heart? I know sometimes I can be, and the worries of my world choke it out. Jesus is saying to his disciples and to all who's listening, hey, listen, I have something that I want to share with you. I want to transform this story into something else. My favorite is Acts chapter 16. Paul and Silas in Philippi, I've been there, walked in the area, probably right where they stayed. It's pretty amazing. They get in trouble and they get whipped with rods. I don't know what that feels like, but it doesn't sound good. They get beaten with rods, and then they get thrown in jail. Do you remember what they're doing? Yeah, they're praying and singing to God. They're singing a hymn. Tell me, I think I would have been in a pretty fearful place. They just got whipped. They're coming after me. I don't know how this is going to turn out. They're worshiping and singing, and an earthquake happens and the doors of the prison come open. Their fearful place became a place of greater intimacy with God. He keeps wanting to do that. All of the Psalms of David that are written from tight places, if you read those, like in the late 50s, early 60s, they lead us to a greater intimacy with God. I think under God's grace, every fear that we're struggling with, we see it in the disciples' story, every fear that we're struggling with can be an invitation to increased intimacy with the Father. That's how he takes something and makes it anti-fragile in your life. That's how he builds something through testing and using it. And that's how I think, I'm more and more convinced, and I can't wait to see more of this in my life. That's how he redeems even fear itself in your life, turning it into a doorway into greater things.